All right, welcome back. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hear me perfect. Okay, cool. All right, so I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I know there might be a few people trickling in. I just want to check everybody's Zoom proficiency. Does everybody know that there's a reactions button, right? And you can thumbs up or you can clap. So look on your toolbar where your video and your mute would be. Let's play real quick. Hit me with the thumbs up if you found where that is. Or okay, this is good. All right, let's do a clap just for the heck of it. Not that clapping for anybody. You can clap for me. I take claps. Thank you. All right, cool. So good. Yeah, I like sometimes the old-fashioned thumbs up, but that works too. So okay, perfect. That lets me know you're out there. So I just want to say welcome back. Kierra's here with us, and we're gonna meet her in just a minute. She's gonna meet all of you, but because we're talking about equity and we're talking about feelings, we're gonna do an inclusion. But just to kind of reground everybody and what we're doing here, so you can explain this to another person so they don't think you're a part of some cult or something bad. What we're doing is we're regrounding in some common purpose. We're trying to have a rich dialogue about equity. We're talking about how we can understand equity, the intersection of equity ourselves and in the work. And then today we're going to talk about relationships and feelings and how do they all intertwine, right? We could be doing this right, we could be doing this wrong, but at the end of the day, we're coming together with a common purpose to help ourselves become better so we can help our students. So I'm gonna let you read this. It's our inclusion quote, right? So I found this. It's like one of my favorite quotes. We started talking about equity work. Because when you start doing equity work, this quote means a lot, right? On the fringes, it doesn't mean as much, but something that we talk about, my administrative team, we get met with fantastic resistance all the time, right? And so once you start digging into equity work, once you start disrupting, like this becomes a thing, right? So next week we start talking about ally, co-conspirator, and what does that mean, and where do I fall in that continuum? But once you check somebody, you start entering in the realm of
You're muted all of a sudden. We can't hear you.
Can you still hear me? Okay. All right, looks good. Okay. So these are our National Equity Project norms. We start talking about doing equity work. I want you to pick a different one from last time to kind of lean into for this time together. And so just take a second and figure out which one you might want to use today. You don't have to tell anybody, but just make sure you pick one. Okay. Perfect. Anybody need more time? Okay. Just really quickly, just a couple of our commitments that we made last time that we said we would do. And there were many more last time, I just shortened it. We're committed to this work together, and we know that together we're better. Please engage in the activities. I got a friend on the call, made time today to be here. So just please engage and let's all participate in this dialogue. If you don't understand something, Kierra's a nice person. You can just stop, ask, and then at the end, I'm going to share just a couple of things with you if there's time. Again, if you need anything more, I'll stick around on the call or on the time together. You can just ask. My favorite inclusion activity, we usually do this like in a circle, and I bought my daughter like this rose for Valentine's Day, I think last year. And so we pass this around like it's a talking piece, and it's actually a rose, doesn't have a thorn on it. So what you do is everybody goes around and just simply shares, what's your rose? What's something that you've loved or excited about since last time we met? What's your thorn? What's something that upset you or is not going so well? Or what's something you're looking forward to, your bud? So we'll just do this as our quick inclusion, and then we'll get to meet Kierra here in just a second. Chris, can you unmute everybody? All right. Is Chris there? Let me see. All right. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah.
You can.
Yep.
Thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yep.
Cool. Kierra, do me a favor. Unmute yourself, or maybe you're unmuted already. Can you just do your rosebud or thorn?
I wasn't in, so I would say rose. My thorn would be I'm a little bit nervous about presenting to everyone. And then I am looking forward to, or was that? Yeah. So I'm looking forward to hopefully participating in one of these engagements again.
Kierra did a great example because she did all three. You can just pick one. So
Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
You can say go. It's okay. Overachiever, you're good.
all the time.
So nervous, you took all three. So everybody jump in, and you can just jump in and say rose, butter, thorn.
I guess thorn would be getting used to doing these, trainings on Zoom. So that's probably what it's a little different.
Rose, I like that. I like the dialogue, but the thorn is this is a new concept with the Zoom thing.
Yeah.
Rose, I don't know if anyone else is reading one of the book selections, the self-guided books, but this coincides very well with the rooted classroom. And so it's been good to see, totally unexpected, how these were going to intersect.
I think Bud for me is I'm just looking forward to the opportunity to talk more and get to know each other better and talk more about how we can move forward with this.
Sure.
I think mine would be a bud, as I missed last week, so I'm excited to hear kind of this in-service. I'm looking forward to it.
A rose for me would be, we did a senior parade for our seniors. So they all got in their cars and drove through the town. And for something different, it was something good that came out of bad. It was really fun. The community came out, which is a lot more inclusive than just the graduation ceremony with the families. So it was communities. They had signs up. They were cheering and honking right along with us. So that was a rose for me this week, was seeing my students in their cars waving and the community support.
Cool.
A bud for me this week.
Oh, sorry. Yep, go ahead.
A bud for me this week, I'm sorry, a thorn, was cleaning out my classroom yesterday and getting all my students' stuff and setting it all up for them to pick up.
Rose for me is just meeting with this group and really thinking about how we're going to make a difference with every kid, with every staff member, to make education really important for everybody.
I like that one. Thank you.
A thorn for me would also be having to go in and clean out my classroom this week, especially not being able to interact with the other people in the building and having to stay in your own space.
One of the rose / buds for myself is how adaptable families have been when reaching out to them virtually. I feel like we continue to go, and especially last week as we are kind of narrowing down our school year, families have been really adaptable, and I think it's us as educators have really kind of stepped up to be able to reach the families.
One, like, it's a big rose for me, is we recently got contacted by someone I work with at Harvard, Dr. Jal Mehta, and he said that he recommended my school, not my district, but my school, a school in Abbotsford, Canada, and in Jeffco, Colorado, for recognition by the Boston Globe. They're going to write an article at the end of the month about practices that we're doing in the pandemic. And I was like, I'm not even superintendent on that level, but really it came up with one of my neighborhood coordinators. She's like, I think what we should do is we need to call every kid weekly. But then she's like, I think we need to have a mentoring opportunity set up weekly where 168 people are given students to mentor. And we check in with them sometimes about school, but sometimes not, which I thought was really amazing that they're going to highlight, because what that means is other schools are going to adopt what we're doing. In Jefferson County, they just took off Mondays as a take care Monday for everybody in the community, right? So I thought that was cool. And then in Abbotsford, Canada, they actually didn't close school for the most economically disadvantaged students, but rather kept the trains running and made school available for them and just condensed operations and changed the way it looked. And so I thought, like, to even be listed with them, but to actually be doing the work is really cool. So that was my rose. And he just emailed us.
Very nice.
Okay, anybody else that want to share? All right, I'm gonna advance the slides. Kierra, you about ready? Okay, cool.
Ready.
Yeah.
Okay, here you go.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Kierra Pickens. So I have my master's degree in clinical psychology from Roosevelt University. I am currently working in private practice. So I work in River in Chicago, and then I work in the south suburbs as well. So I'm at a couple different practices. My populations go from anywhere. Well, okay. My youngest client is 6. My eldest is 56. So I work with individuals, I work with couples, I work with families, and I do groups. So I'm also a mental health consultant with Chicago Public Schools, and that encompasses me working with educators to provide them psychoeducation and then educating them about useful interventions and strategies with students who present as challenging or who have specific diagnoses. I also provide professional development workshops with the teachers, and then social and emotional classroom groups with students. And then I also have parent groups for the students who have children, or with students who have parents of students who have IEPs. You can go to the next slide. Alrighty, before we jump in. Alrighty, so how do we build and sustain relationships right now? And I think this time is challenging, especially since a lot of these platforms weren't set up, or most schools are in the middle of setting them up. So I think the first thing we need to do is humanize yourself and realize that everyone is in the same boat. Everyone has this level of stress related to the unknown. So for our students, and especially their parents, them having to now be teachers in some type of way, there's obviously going to be heightened levels. So it's important to, when you're reaching out to families, kind of already acknowledge what you're going through and what they're going through as well. Also, improving community building. So a lot of students are on social media and they're on different social platforms. So if we're using that to our advantage, then we don't have to stick to a specific. I think, hey, Devon, can you go back to the slides? Thank you. So if we are kind of like using this to our advantage, able to work with the students a little bit more. So developing creative virtual activities. That could even be like school or educational based games. That could even be like different or who can complete the many word problems or this assignment in this amount of time. And I think that also gives them a little bit of choice and flexibility. I think also it's important to use these platforms provided by your school to post mass messages. Right now, and I don't know about everyone, but I'm finding that like working from home can take twice as long. So it's kind of because things that you would usually do in a school day, 7 to 3, 8 to 4, things like that, they're now like going on to like maybe 7, 8 o'clock at night because you're in the same environment and then there are a ton of distractions. It's important to kind of like set aside time, and if you can post a mass message or a video on things that you have going on or that you want your students to do that because they have the flexibility to access these messages and these videos at their convenience. Also, consistency. So if you're meeting with maybe like a colleague or a parent or even specific students, try to keep the same appointment time. I know for me, for my individual clients and the teachers that I meet with, we try to keep the same time weekly just so we know that that time is carved out because there are so many distractions going on and there are so many things that you could be doing during that time. So that way it kind of creates that consistency, everyone to be on the same page and remember. Um, if you have limited availability or certain boundaries about around your availability, it's important that you're able to respond in a timely manner that matters to you. So if you're working and saying that like you're working until 3 or 4 and you have like that 5 to 6 hours for specifically to respond to students and to parents, let that be that time and let it be just so you have a cutoff time because there are definitely parents that are essential workers that are working until 8 o'clock at night. So if those are you have those specific cases, have them reach out to you and have them establish like a consistent time for you in order to in order to expect a response from you. And last but not least, just be sure to again respect your own boundaries around time and ability. I cannot stress this enough. There are so many people, so many teachers that are answering emails at 11 o'clock at night. And if that you're a night owl and you want to stay up working all night, that's your boundary. But what are you communicating to other people around those boundaries? Are they permeable? I mean, and I think that depends on you and what each parent has going on. But overall, you want to make sure that you have set boundaries. Oh, you can advance. Thank you. All right. So bracing for trauma. I think this is most important because there are so many students who are suffering from different kinds of trauma. And right now, COVID is presenting different levels of stressors and different levels of trauma. And I think even the media can be a form of trauma because we're exposed to so many people sick who are dying. So I think most importantly, we need to think about how we approach trauma. So right now, I think for you guys to think about what trauma does to an individual's choice and decision making is most important. So trauma is always mostly unexpected, just like in the case of COVID. And so like that loss of control that you have kind of this helpless place. So you kind of want to think about how you can give the students or the families choice back. And of course, this doesn't mean like being super flexible, but when we think about choice, it's kind of like, okay, is this the window that the assignment has to be done? Can you do it in the next hour or two, or can we get it done by the end of the day? So flexibility and choice, but not making it like a situation. Um, Also, just when you return to the class, if you could establish some type of normalcy around doing check-ins. And this doesn't have to be where you guys are having like a group therapy, but also if you are doing these regular check-ins, you're going to be able to observe patterns in different kids. You're going to be able to observe their behavior, what's changed, what's kind of their platform of what's normal. So if you're asking these questions, you can pretty much just start by asking what's on your mind, what are you feeling, does anyone have anything to share? And I think a barrier for the teachers that I work with is when you get that unexpected response, because sometimes you don't know what a student is going to say. Um, so I think primarily the first thing you want to do is acknowledge what was said. And that could even be kind of like reframing what they're saying. It's kind of like a basic therapy, like 101. And I think, of course, like your educators, if you're kind of like reflecting their response and rephrasing what they're saying and repeating, you're letting them know that you hear them. And in being heard, that's going to improve that communication. So even if you might not have the best rapport with that student, they're going to know that they're able to be heard by you. And also, if needed, assess the supports within the school, outside of the school, and also kind of take time to follow up with whatever emotion they're talking about or what they're saying that's on their mind. So and I think, of course, this can be difficult to remember, but maybe if you all can even just do like a collective spreadsheet and like jot down some initials and something that was like concerning that they said, something that does immediate intervention, but something that you're just like holding. That way you're not keeping it with you, but you're jotting it down and remembering to kind of like check in and follow up. And once you're following up, you can kind of decide, does this student need more interventions? Is this student going to be okay? Does this student just need me to have meaningful goodbye? So meaningful and goodbyes can change a lot. So in that conversation, pretty much just acknowledging the student and assessing supports. Also, we are going to also talk about like small transitions. So think about the amount of time the students are being out of school. And I think for everyone, this is kind of like a concern. Like, we're all working from home. What do we do? What do we do when it's time to go back into the school, into the office setting? How are we going to maintain like 7, 8, 9 hours in a building? What does that look like? What is that transition going to be like? So be mindful of that for yourself. Of course, as educators, that's your primary role, but think about yourself. Think about what your transition is going to be like. Think about how you're going to be able to like sustain being in a classroom for this long amount of time, which previously was normal. So think about what's going to be helpful in your personal transition. So in that, we're talking about including choice. So if you're thinking about your transition, you're thinking about what works for you, but also what works for the student's transition. So if you're giving them options and saying, okay, this is the window of when this needs to be done, then you're able to kind of like gradually transition the students back into having a full day. And I'm not sure what school looks like for the fall, but a lot of schools are talking about, at least in Chicago, talking about like returning in January as far as like universities and things like that. So think about, are you going to do like half of the time that's kind of like guided? Are you going to do teaching lectures? Are you going to allow them to have breaks? What is that going to look like in terms of like your curriculum? Keeping lines of communication open. So this kind of goes along with like some of the spreadsheets that could be an option. So teachers, counselors, and admin should hopefully be able to discuss possible interventions or students that are having these challenges, students who are experiencing difficult times. So basically, a tool that I use with my teachers is like I said, creating some type of spread initials and sharing it with everyone. So on the spreadsheet, the counselors, admin, teachers, they're able to kind of like add their little notes. So basically, if you see that this student is experiencing difficulties in different classes, or if they're experiencing difficulties just with their counselor, you're going to be able to see. That way, you're going to have an understanding of what's going on. So you're going to be able to stay in the loop. Alrighty. Alrighty. Cultivating emotional resilience. So I think resilience depends on the person. So again, you want to think about what what are your own levels of resilience? How do you get through situations? What works for you? So you're you're really thinking about how you what your mental and emotional capacity is first before you approach the students. This is important because you can't really give someone what you don't have. So no one can pour from it. And that's my saying. You can't give out what you don't have. So if you're building your own resilience and you're acknowledging what you can give, you're going to be able to maneuver from there. So in this example, I'll give you an example. If one of your students, if you've had a terrible day at home and one of your students is having like an emotional response, a challenging emotional response that you can't deal with, you need to be able to say, okay, I've had a hard morning, acknowledge that, hold it, but then think about how I plan to approach that. And sometimes it's not going to always be addressing it right then and there. Sometimes it's going to be that student, talking to them and saying, hey, I noticed that you have this going on. Like, let's talk about this later. And sometimes there's going to have to be an immediate intervention. So thinking about what's appropriate for you in that moment and not just what works on paper and what's in the book. Because not everything works for everyone all the time. You also want to have empathy and sympathy. So if you know the difference between empathy and sympathy, you're kind of understanding that you don't need to feel bad for someone, or you can feel bad for someone, but what does that do for you? What is having sympathy and holding those emotions inside yourself? What does that do for the situation? What does that do for the student? So when you have, and you can have that level of understanding and insight on what that student is experiencing, you're better able to help them. So one of the examples I use is, let's just say one of your colleagues is caught stealing from a 7-Eleven. You're going to have questions because you don't have that frame of understanding. Will there be judgments? Maybe, maybe not, depending. But what if a homeless person is caught stealing from the same store? You know, you kind of have that frame of reference where you're saying like maybe they need something. So it's important to have a level of understanding before you're jumping in. That level of understanding helps you approach these issues or these challenges way better, and you're making informed decisions as you go. So based off that understanding, you can kind of like work together with your colleagues, and also you can work with that student. Alrighty. And again, I am really big on boundaries. So with emotional resilience, you have to ask yourself, are you doing all the best that you can do? I am really big on trying not to take my clients and my teachers home. Of course, like students and people experience lots of challenges, lots of difficulties that sometimes we physically just can't do the work for them. So it's important to just remember what your boundaries are and work from there. So if you are kind of like creating something like symbolic of how to kind of off. That could be like a specific song that you listen to, you close your laptop. It could also just be closing your laptop for the day. That could be a specific TV show, something that symbolizes you turning off for the day. Because at the end of the day, the work is going to be there the next day. If you're not doing the best, what could you be doing? If you feel like you can be doing more without fixing the issues for these families, what is it? It's always important to think about emotionally what you can handle and what you can give. In emotional resilience, we also want to think about what the meaning is with these actions and these behaviors with the students. Even right now, some of the students that aren't able to complete assignments, some of the parents that you're not able to get in touch with, what is the meaning of that behavior? What does it mean that they just aren't available, or are there barriers presenting and keeping them from participating? Some of the parents have multiple children or jobs and things like that. Is that one of the barriers to communication? If they don't, they just simply don't care. What is the meaning of them not caring? Is it that they aren't able to navigate that platform? So you kind of want to learn to ask meaningful questions around what the actions mean. Next slide. Thank you. Alrighty, so we have a few questions here. What moves would you encourage schools to make to create a sense of emotional coherence when supporting students? So I think this really depends on, like I said, an individual, but on a school level. What are we doing? There are two different levels that we need to assess. Are we thinking about approaching these students with like an action plan? Do we want something written down with written steps? So if we're having a student that's having a strong emotional reaction versus like anger and versus sadness, do you guys want something on paper as how you should deal with that student, or do you want to approach it individually in your classroom? So the best way I would say to do this is to make a plan for yourself and make a plan for your school, because some behaviors aren't all negative. Some behaviors you just have to understand the meaning, and if you're able to understanding the meaning in your classroom, then later interventions need to be had. Any questions, Mr. LaRosa? Because I know you asked that one.
No, I think that, no, I think you got it. I think that, so we use like behavior support plans, and mainly for students with like IEPs, right? So Devon has anger issues. So, you know, here's how you redirect Devon if he's using bad words or whatever. But I was even just wondering, like, you know, so running a 14-person student services department, like with social workers and counselors and psychologists, and support people that support them, like how do we like triage? And I think, you know, we're going to talk more offline. You're actually probably going to help us do some work with it, but just didn't know how. But yeah, I think you hit it from the classroom perspective. But yeah, and so we'll talk more about it. Yeah, that's just something that I'm constantly thinking of, like what are the right moves to support students through like a breakup, through my parents are, you know, are kicking me out of the house, through like whatever the case may be. Like what are the pieces and how do you mobilize people for that? But we can talk more too. But yeah.
Okay, but I also just want to kind of like reiterate boundaries and kind of like we kind of talked about. Some educators just simply don't have it in their cup to think about what resource going to have to like help someone who's homeless versus who's going through a breakup. So I think it's about utilizing the resources you have within the school and within your coworkers, because at the end of the day, if I'm going through something personal, I might not have that support to give to someone who's going through a breakup. So it's important to talk amongst the staff and think about who could have this capacity. About what the counselors have to bring. Think about what linkage you have outside of the school. At the end of the day, educators can't be therapists as well. And I think there is like more recently, there's like there's a fine line, and people are like straddling the fence between including what their emotional capacity and like being a therapist. So I think as a school that needs to be talked about.
Right.
Like I said, I think that not all people have it, and everyone, you know, you got to pay attention to yourself. Everyone has a different level. Like my level of resilience is probably different, you know, and that's based, you know, based off of just personal experiences. So if you've never dealt with a homeless student, you have that empathy and maybe you have sympathy for them, but where do you go from there? How do you kind of build that resilience? And that starts with yourself, and that starts what you're able to handle. And if you have to you have to really recognize if you're able to handle it. And if you're not able to handle it, don't hold it. You have to release it and problem solve with your team. That's where teamwork really comes into play.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome. Alrighty. The second question is, how can we express to parents more that we understand that this is hard? I think this goes back to one of my previous slides where I just said pretty much humanize yourself. If you are pretty much saying that I don't understand what's going on as well, but this is what we're doing, then you're kind of like easing their stress a little bit. I think everyone is stuck in this uncertain time, but ever these parents are, because you know, I have a nephew and I tried to help him with his homework the other day. And I was like, I just don't know how these parents are doing it. I'm just trying to navigate the platform. And I'm like, okay, this is a class too. And so I totally understand. And I'm able to kind of like put myself in these parents' shoes briefly. But also as educators, it's like, you know, you're dealing with parents who are probably working and contacting you at different times of the day. So I think right now, if you're pretty much acknowledging what they're saying and kind of just expressing that you understand, that's all they pretty much need. Understanding them pretty much coincides with flexibility. And I think right now it's difficult, but we pretty much just we don't have a choice but to be flexible. So if you are communicating that you understand and that you are doing the best in this plan and with the platform you're given, then that should be good enough. And like I said, that goes back to your personal boundaries. What if you feel like you can be doing more, send an extra message or two, but if not, then you're doing the best you can. And I also think it is helpful to reach out to these families. It's important to let them know that you kind of like acknowledge going through and their efforts. So even if you are a short email to parents and giving them positive reinforcement to keep going, then that'll help as well. Just simple notes help. So even if you're sending a mass message or just an individual message saying, hey, thanks for having so-and-so participate in online learning. I know this time is hard for you. It's hard for all of us. Thank you so much. That little message goes a long way. All righty. Thanks for the question, Kelly. All right. Another question we have is, given all of the uncertainty and lack of hard facts about COVID-19 and the trauma it brings, how do we as teachers, support staff who also have questions, fears, and frustrations, confusions, etc., answer? So I think that's similar to the previous question. Right now, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we don't have answers. And I think that is okay to say because it's not up to us. So as educators, be mindful of your role. Be mindful of the position you're in in reference to the world. So if you don't have the answers, you can't pull from that. You can't give them what you don't have. It's important to say what you do have. It's important to acknowledge what you have. So if you're saying this is our plan for the rest of the few weeks, I can keep you updated on this, then that's okay. If you can't address all of the questions, if you it's okay to say you don't have the answers. It's okay to say I can get the answer or I don't have it currently. It's okay to be transparent with these parents. Transparency goes a long way, but not enough to where you're, kind of like increasing their stressors, their anxiety around what's happening. Make sure that you're just saying, this is what I'm doing, this is what I can do for you, and this is our follow-up. You can simply say, we don't have the answers to that yet, but we are definitely going to find out as soon as things start rolling out.
And
Here
then
we have another question from Megan Nilsson on the chat function. And here's the question. Do you think the fall will bring a honeymoon period for students and teachers? And will there be a fall off once we get back to normal?
I think this goes along with the transition. So I think it's okay if there is a honeymoon stage. I think there is but as long as there are options in that. So we want to make sure that these students are still able to learn, but we're not saying like, hey, we're giving you tons of flexibility with turning things in and like months and months down the line. But I think it's important to have a plan. So first week is the honeymoon stage. Maybe the first week is getting acclimated. And maybe the second week is where you start to like gradually focus on more work. And then the third week looks like more classwork or more homework. I think honestly, there is some honeymoon stage that's going to be had. And I think about even when you start a new school year and how you plan with your team and with your coworkers, there's always a honeymoon stage. But I think maybe the question is how long it'll last. So with your faculty members, as a full team, think about how long that honeymoon stage will last, because it's going to come. And if you guys want to kind of like get on the ball and things that are going to go into play, then I think the time probably now or as soon as you find out what that transition into school looks like. Because I think there's a honeymoon stage every year, honeymoon stage with the kids. So just thinking about what that's going to look like. And then the second part of the question was, I can see it, a fall off about with the honeymoon once we get back to normal. I think
Will there be a fall off once we get back to normal?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the way you guys control the transition and structure that transition. Because as of now, I mean, unless you're in preschool or kindergarten, this is, school, the academic setting is normal. This period is not normal. And I think we are getting to a point where it feels normal, like everyone has found their routine. But the more we make this normal, the more school becomes abnormal. So if we are developing normalcy in the transition back to school, then there should be a fall off. So, and hopefully it won't be held until like November, December, and hopefully you guys are able to like talk as a team and talk about what this normalcy looks like. What is this going to be in terms of like homework, classwork? What does this actually look like? What are we expecting of these students? If you're talking expectations with like faculty members and with students, then I think you're going to be able to kind of like decrease this honeymoon stage and increase the normalcy going to eventually come.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Devon, did you have any questions?
No, but I appreciate like what you kind of called out with only giving as much information as you have. Like we were on a call today with like the school-based leadership team, and they're like, you know, people are asking about grade and this and that. And I'm all like, we're moving at the speed of trust that we're able to move at, right? And know that I love my bosses, kind of, maybe a little bit, but I think the thing that they don't know anymore than I do, right? I'm just the link to the people, right? And so like, and I love my teachers but they're only asking that. It's coming from some place, but I always have to remind them, they're like, Devon, we don't know how you have the way to calm people, but you just have that way. And I'm like, but I appreciate Kierra saying like, we can't manufacture answers. We can't manufacture a vaccine, although they're gonna spend a lot of money trying. But like, you know, but what we're gonna do is, here's what we know today, and here's what we're gonna do today together, like as a team, and just taking that we're better together, and we can only share what we have. So I appreciate you calling that out in the room. But more questions?
Well,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I just think that helps with like preparation, because I personally, I know the day before or the Friday before the quarantine, everything was like, you know, regularly scheduled, and you're like, okay, all right. And that's just an example of how like people were planning for things and they didn't have any control. So then when quarantine started, it was like, you're at home, and now you're just looking around like, okay, so I planned this stuff and now it's not gonna happen. So at this point, if you could take it one like day, or even try to take things like 3 days at a time, but future planning around specific expectations is going to be unrealistic. So it's important to think about what expectations are realistic during this time.
Yeah, appreciate that. Cool. Any other questions for Kierra? Because I know you probably have appointments yet after this, but.
Kierra, I thought it was really good when you talked about boundaries, because I know as I talk with like other teachers in our school, that's where we're really struggling at. Like, it's easier to make boundaries when you're at a building than when you're at home, because we've been finding that we're doing like school stuff at all hours. Yeah. So if we continue this, which some form we will, like we all said, that will have to somehow change.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, my mom is an assistant principal, so I see her having like boundaries crossed all the time. I'm like, hey mom, we talked about. And then just as far as like the teachers that I'm still consulting with by video and by phone, I'm finding that, you know, they're having parents that are contacting them at 11 and 12 p.m. and they feel this urgency to answer. But at the end of the day, if it's that urgent, then they probably call 911, you know, and you're not the police. If there is this sense of urgency to respond, think about what that means for you. Think about if you're respecting yourself.
One of the things that keeps running through my mind that I just don't quite have the words for yet is that we want to do two things. We want to send the message that we understand how difficult this is for families. We don't want anybody to be stressed out and be like over the top stressed about school. At the same time, we don't want to send the message to our kids that they can't do the work at this time. We know that they are capable of doing the work. So I don't know, do you just have any comments about how we can kind of send both of those messages at once?
Honestly, I think the best way to do this is positive reinforcement. If you could even make it anything like a game at this point and say, if you do that, I'm not sure what kind of like resources you have, but let's say like if this assignment is completed by this time, this date, the next one, and you could probably even like assignments, but you can say like the next one you don't have to do if you do it by this time and date. Or you can pretty much give some type of incentive for possibly the return of school. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but you always want to use positive rewards and reinforcements.
So Kierra, we do this every week for the next couple of weeks. If you're not busy, you could come to next week's. It'd be cool to have you, even if you're able to start with us. I know you have appointments and stuff, and you're working. But yeah, this is our second week. But I mean, so we're gonna go next week and then June 3rd. But if you're available, we'd love to have you around just to like even pick our brains as we start playing with equity, right? And start saying, what do we do? How do we see ourselves in the work? And then how do we disrupt? And then we're gonna try to do some consultancies our last week about our equity challenges that we've identified ourselves. So, I mean, even if you're able to pop in for 5 minutes, or maybe if you have any time, we'd love to have you. But
okay, well, I'm like I said, I'm big on choice, so I thank you for asking me, but also, ask everyone else if they even want me back, So, of course, I am for sure down, but I just also want to respect everyone else on the video call and make sure it's okay that I'm returning. So I think,
I'm reading body language. I'm reading body language all day here, as the principals do. People start turning their backs toward me in the meeting. I can tell. One thing. Oh, the 23rd. Do you want to talk about it? What you might share?
Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
What I might share on the 23rd?
Oh, so we can do it together. So June 23rd, Kierra and I are coming back together for we was supposed to be an in-person training. We're going to take equity a step further. And so we're going to try to pair together and talk about both our work, right? Both our work talking about emotional resilience, relationships, equity, and put them together. It's like a full day with breaks. We'll do breakouts and so on and so forth. We're going to come together again June 23rd. And these were just meant to be like, people need to talk now, and we have some things to present now. How can they apply these things now? So on the 23rd of June, we have like a longer one that Chris and Diane and Kim can share about if you're interested in hearing more or dialoguing more with us. But do you want to just give a plug what that might look like on your end? Okay.
Well, of course, like I said, I'm all about exploring yourself. So my side of things will kind of be like activities geared towards exploring yourself and kind of like acknowledging who you are before you approach the work, because sometimes there's can be like some level of like apprehension or resistance. What does that mean for you, and how do you work through it? Because of course, like one has like particularly like maybe coworkers, and it's hard to like communicate, or it's hard to kind of like work with them. So what does that actually mean, and how do you do that? How do you do this with students? So I think that'll be my piece.
Cool. Well, let's all test out our test out our reactions real quick and see if we can give a round of applause for Kierra.
Oh my goodness, look at all these little hands. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. We appreciate you taking time today. You did great. I know you were nervous.
Yeah, I was.
Nah, we appreciate you. Really quickly, because I got emails about just like people are wondering what to read. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of things for next week, and then just the book list that if you want to go crazy with it and start Amazon crazy. Amazon is making $10,000 a minute is what somebody told me, or I read something like that. So now I don't get any stock or any controlling anything in Amazon, but I am going to show you the book list that you could get from anywhere you would like. But just because I don't want to overwhelm people, but you'd asked for it, so I do want to take a second. So again, our time together is only an hour a week, but if you're just looking to just like, what do I read this summer? If I want to grab one book or two books, like these are books that we regularly use. So if you want to know some of the people, Maisha Wynn, like you can't talk about equity without understanding parts of restorative. So Maisha Wynn is a professor. She was a professor at UW-Madison. Now she's at UC Davis in California. She's created a school of education that's centered around restorative. If you're an English major, it's English infused with restorative. And the theme is, how do people stop killing each other, but loving each other, right? So, and the book is actually based about the school I work at. She was a consultant for restorative at the school I work at. I got to meet Maisha Wynn a year ago in April. Amazing book. I would tell you to get Justice on Both Sides. We want to do more than just survive, Bettina Love. She just became an endowed professor, and she's out of Atlanta. She did the opening convocation at Madison School District. I got to meet her, and she came to my school and talked and worked with me and my staff, and then we go back and forth. We're going to work with her next week on what does it mean to be a co-conspirator. Ivory Tolson, this book, sorry, you just have to Google Ivory Tolson, No Bad Stats. Black people need people who believe in Black people enough not to believe every bad thing they hear about Black people. His title is like you could just be talking to him and like that's a sentence he said that someone's like, that should be a book, right? And so if you Google him and watch his, just hear him talk about his book, it's amazing, one of my favorites. And then Zaretta Hammond, we talk about culture responsive learning practices. We talk about learning partnerships. We're going to dig more into June 23rd. The idea of being a warm demander, which that's between her and Lisa Delpit. What does it mean to like have expectations for students, but be a warm demander? Like, I need you to do this because this will help you. And then Chris Emden, who I hope to meet like really, really soon. Like, this is a situation where like, you know, the person who knows the person. So Ben Wild is a friend of mine who's like best friends with Chris Emden. So it's like, I just somehow have to connect Ben to get me to connect with Chris. But for white folks who teach in the hood, another critical look on equity and equitable practices and how are we disrupting those practices. And then just a book that if you haven't read or aren't familiar with, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which will end with some of her work. But people that asked, I got a couple emails saying, we want to know what to read and what to do. Again, if you got any of these, you're doing the right work. And if you're reading them, it's about that internal work, like Kierra was talking about. Equity work, like we said, starts with you. It's not what other people aren't doing. It's about what you are doing with the work, with your students, and with you. So these are just the titles I would recommend to you. And just our closing moves, just a couple more resources I want to show you. Sorry about that. So the readings, they're really quick, but I do want you to be somewhat familiar with them. And again, I'm not Harvard professor telling you have to. I'm not going to call you out if you don't read them. The 4 Eyes of Oppression, I want you to take a look at that. No More Allies, the 7 Key Equity Moves, and then Equity Challenges in Public Schools are just 4 things I want you to skim. I added some more resources, and hopefully you took a peek at the other resources. And those resources are things you can start using. That student adult inclusion activities, that's a way to build relationships, right? We use flip grids. We give out like little gift cards, and we have staff meetings on Zoom, pop up a flip grid, everybody's name's in it. So-and-so won a $15 gift card. So there's inclusion activities you can use if you're a classroom teacher or if you have meetings with people. Feel free to click that. And then Equity in the Classroom is going to give you specific strategies that you can use. But please be familiar with our readings and just skim them. You don't have to do anything else. And then those are our resources. I'll stick around like always. And if you have questions, thank you so much. So we'll come back again, exact same time next Wednesday. We've got some stuff planned for you. And again, people gave Kierra a thumbs up. So I think you're part of the crew, Kierra, if you want to come back, any portion if it fits. And then in terms of eval, I don't know any of the logistics. So Chris, if you want to jump in, or anybody who knows more than me about filling things out.
So Lori had attached, if you guys just look in that chat box there is a bit.ly that you go ahead and fill out your the evaluations, and you'll just automatically receive your PDCs once those evaluations have been completed.
Well, I have to say thank you. I got to see my comments. I got to see the eval. So thank you so much. I appreciate everybody. And thanks for coming back too. Like I said, you can always bring a friend. I saw some children as friends in there. That's fine. Bring them back. We'll take them as well. But feel free to, if you know someone who's looking to get some PD, what do you call them again, Kim?
They're PDCs now, yeah.
When I crossed the border, we don't have those anymore. So I have to learn and unlearn. But I want to say thank you again. And I'll stick around if people have questions. And so thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Next night's meeting, everybody. Everyone's faces.
Thank you.
Goodbye.